Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. Today we are going to be creating an editable table using a repeater. So essentially we will have a table with columns and rows, and instead of just looking at the table, we are also going to be able to go in and make changes to the table, and then eventually, let's say, save this to our data collection and update the data that we have in our CMS. So if you want to learn how to do all that and more, let's get started. Okay, so before we hop in and start talking solutions, I want to make sure that we all understand what the problem is and that you're in the right tutorial. So what I've done here is I have a brand new Wix Studio website. Generally, the things that we're going to be demonstrating today can be done also in the classic editor. There will be some slight differences in capabilities when it comes to design, and I'll highlight that once we hop into the solution phase. What I've done so far is I've added in a CMS collection. Okay, so here inside of CMS, if I go here to my collections, you'll see that we have a collection called cars. And this just has some mock data here. This could be a collection about anything. And we just have like color, make, year, etc. So different information about our cars. And our goal is to display this in a table. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go over and close this collection. And I'm going to add in a table. So let me just give here like a search table. And I'm going to go here to the tables. And let's just drag in like a really simple one like this one. Okay, so this is your standard Wix table, and we can easily connect it to the data from our database, from our CMS collection, using a data set. So I'm just going to click here, Connect to CMS. That was just this right over here. And I'm going to click here to add a data set in this panel that opened up on the right. I'm going to choose our cars collection, and we'll just name it cars dataset for now. Now that I've connected it to the data set, we should just be able to see here all of the different data from our cars. Okay, so I think that was a bit of a bug. All I need to do was to disconnect it over here from the data set. So I just did not connected, and then I did connect again, and all of these showed up automatically. Okay, so this is how I expected it to look as soon as I connected it to the data set, but I digress. Anyway, so this is a Wix table, and it's connected to data from a data collection, all no code, all good. The thing is that this table is a read-only table. So we can only read the table. We can't, no matter what settings we go to try and change over here or anything like that, we have no way of allowing the user to edit the content inside of this table and save it back to our CMS. So here, this is the live site, the published site, and you can see here that I have no option to edit the contents of the table. And that is essentially our goal for today. We're going to try and make a table that is editable, that essentially a user will be able to go and click, for example, on one of these cells here inside of the table and edit the input, edit the cell, excuse me, and then save that back to the collection. Okay, so that's our goal for today. And the approach that I'm going to take is using repeaters. So let's head back into the editor. And instead of having our table like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a repeater element. So let me go over here to add elements. And I'm going to look over here for repeaters. And I'm just going to add a repeater like this. And we're going to use this to simulate a table. Okay, obviously this isn't a table, it's a repeater, but it has a lot in common with a table. So we have essentially rows, and what we need to do now is kind of build this into columns. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide each item here in the repeater into a few sections. So I'm going to open up the inspector over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the advanced CSS grid right over here. And this is a point where we kind of diverge a little bit between Wix Studio and Wix Classic because we can't really have these kind of grids within the repeater within Wix Classic. You can still lay out the elements kind of in an orderly way like I'm going to show you and mimic it more or less, but you won't have this full design experience that I'm going to be demonstrating now. So let me go ahead and apply the advanced grid. And what I'll do is I'll just add in a few more columns. Okay, so let's say I want to make a table with, I think we had 5 columns. Let me just double check here on the live site. Yeah, we have 5 columns. And this is a bit of a downside in terms of the fact that we can't use the table element. We need to know how many columns we have here in advance, and it won't be able to be determined just by connecting it directly to the database. So if you kind of adjust the amount of columns in your CMS collection, you'll have to also make some adjustments here inside of your UI. But for now, let's try and stay positive. I'm going to add in 5 columns like that. And this division will be applied to all of the items here in the repeater. So I only need to do it for one, and all of that will be applied equally. And if we expand the repeater like this, then the columns will also become equally expanded. The width will grow as well. Now what we need to do is we need to add in some kind of element which will display our text. But we also need to remember that we want to be able to edit it. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab here an input element. Okay, so that's right over here, input. And I'm going to just grab a simple text input like this one. And inside of the settings, I'm going to get rid of the field title. And I'm going to drag this and put it inside of our repeater. And I want to get it specifically into one of these columns right over here. And when I go here and I open up the inspector, and I go here to the design panel, I want to essentially make it, so I'm going to turn on here advanced settings as well in terms of the design. So I'm going to turn that on. And I'm going to make this percentage-wise, so this is going to be 100%. And I'm going to make the height as well 100%. So essentially what's going to control the size of these inputs is going to be the actual size of our repeater and the column, so that if I make an adjustment like this, I know that my inputs will automatically adjust, and the same goes for if I adjust it like that. So our makeshift table is really coming along. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take these text inputs and we're going to duplicate it so that we have one for each column. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to Control C and Control V, and I'm going to do that a few times, 3, 4, and we're going to want to make sure that these are all aligned and each one is inside of one of the grid boxes. So I'm just going to do that here from the side panel. And I'm going to go over here, and here I can just select which one of the grid boxes I want it to go in. So this will be, let's say, the rightmost one. And I'm also going to make sure that it's just sitting very nicely inside of the grid. So I could just center it like that, for example. And I'm going to do the same for all the other ones. Let me just do that real quickly. There we go, center it. And for some reason, the width of that one collapsed. So let's do that again. And I'm going to adjust this one. Yeah, center it. I don't know why all these are jumping around. They're all not playing very nicely. There we go. That one's there. There we go, 100. And this one also, let's make that width 100, and hopefully we're done. There we go. Okay, so now essentially we have a text input for each column. You can do more kind of design adjustments if you want. Like, I don't know if you want to see the borders or whatnot, but I think this looks somewhat table-like, so I'm going to leave it for now. And here comes the really, really fun part where we essentially connect this table to the data from our collection. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and start connecting our table to the CMS collection data and working on the functionality of updating the different inputs and saving that to our collection. We're going to be doing that using some Velo code. And before we do that, I just want to show those of you who might be thinking, wait, why don't we connect this via a data set like we did for the table before? Why we can't do that. So here on the live site currently, I have a setup of what it would look like if we had connected everything using data sets. So while the connection went very smoothly and easily, and you can see the data being populated here inside of our repeater table, we had some issues with updating the info. So if I was, for example, to make a change over here in Sarah, and let's say update this to 2016, and then try and click save, you can see there's no reaction at all. Nothing happens. And if I, for example, try to make a change here to John, and I click save, then an error occurs. That's because of something that has to do with permissions, but essentially the connection via the dataset is working. Okay, it recognizes that I'm trying to make a save operation, and it's not letting me for some reason, but it's not a fundamental issue. On the other hand, with all the other lines, if I try to make a change and click save, nothing happens at all. I'm not sure if this is how it's supposed to work. I checked this also inside of the classic editor. It works the same way. So I'm guessing that for now, this is just how it works, that in terms of read and write collections, the write functionality only works for the current item, or essentially like the top item inside of the collection that's being displayed, which is a little disappointing because it would have worked super nicely if it was possible to do via the dataset collections. But on the bright side, it gives us a great excuse to write some Velo code. So let's hop in and start doing that. Okay, so here back in the editor, I am going to enter code mode. And that would be right over here on the side. And I'm just going to click here, start coding. And then we have our IDE open right over here. So the first thing we're going to want to do is get our data. And in order to do that, we're going to be using none other than Wix Data API. So Wix Data right over here. And let's get rid of all this jargon. Awesome. Now I'm going to create a function which is responsible for getting our data. And that's going to be async function. And let's say get table data. And here what we're going to do is we're going to run a simple data query. So we're going to say const car query or cars query results equals to await, and here we're going to await Wix data dot query, and we're going to be querying the cars collection, and we're going to do dot find. So I'm not addressing here different things like pagination and limits and stuff like that, but essentially just running a very basic query on our collection. And then we can say here const car data equals to cars query result dot items. Okay, and I'll just put in a log here to make sure that we can see our data and make sure that we have it all. So cars, and then here I'll have car data. Let me just make this capital so that I'm following best practices. Awesome. And what I'll do is I'll actually return that data over here. So return car data. Next, what we'll want to do, why is this giving me an error? Cannot find car, not cart, but car. I'm so used to doing e-commerce tutorials. Okay, so there we go. So we have a function that will get our car data. And the next thing we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to display this data here in our repeater. So let me do some naming here. So let's call this our table repeater. Kind of ironic, table repeater. And for each of these inputs, we'll also want to give a significant name. So instead of just like input 10, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call these columns. So this will be column 1, and we'll use that same naming convention for all the rest of the columns. So this will be column 2, and then 3, and then 4, and finally 5. Awesome. So we've done all of our naming, and now what we're ready to do is to actually populate this repeater with the data from our cars. So in order to do that, we're going to need to tell the repeater how to behave once it gets actual data. So I'm going to create another function over here under our getTableData, and this will be a function that will be responsible for setting up the repeater. So let's say async function setup table repeater. And inside of this function, we're going to first set up the onReady for the repeater. So this is going to be repeater, table repeater dot on item ready. And I have tutorials about each of these individual topics as well. So if you need to learn more about like Wix query, if you need to learn more about repeaters, head to the channel, just look for those keywords and you'll get tutorials that really go in depth about each of those topics. Here I'm assuming some passing familiarity with the things, and I'm not really explaining everything in a very detailed manner beyond what's necessary for this tutorial. So here we're going to have item data, and we're going to have index, but we don't need index. So let's go ahead and tell each column how to behave. So here inside of our onItemReady, we're going to have to do something interesting because our columns and our data are coming in two slightly different formats. So our columns are numbered 1 to 5, but our data is going to come as an object with key value pairs. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to convert that data into an array essentially that we can easily assign to our columns and make this kind of a scalable solution so that if we add more columns and more data later on, we won't have to make any adjustments to our code. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to convert our item data into an array. And let's do that over here. So we'll say const data equals to item data. So it's object, one second, object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get the object dot keys of item data. Okay, so we're going to get all of the keys of the item data. So that'll be all the keys as opposed to the values. And then what we'll do is we will map that. Okay, and for each key, what we'll do is instead we'll take the item data key, which will essentially be the value. Okay, so we're creating an array of all the keys, and then using that array of the keys, we're creating an array of all the values from the item data. And then now that we have that, essentially what we can do is we can iterate through that. So we can say, let's say data dot for each, and let's say for each item, what we'll do is we will say that the item, so now we're going to assign the data to the column. So item, and I'm using a template literal here, so that's backticks. I know it's very hard to see in the video. It's not single quotation marks, it's backticks. And we're going to have here column, and here we're going to have a variable for the number of the column. We numbered our columns from 1 to 5, but an array starts at 0, so we'll essentially be using the index here, and we're going to add 1 to the index because the index will start from 0 and we want to start from 1. So index plus 1 dot value will be equal to the item. Okay? And I think that that should do the trick. The last thing that we would need to do is to assign the data to the repeater. So these are like the instructions for how the repeater should act, but we actually need to assign the data over. So what we're going to do here is just assign the data to the repeater. So select the table repeater and say dot data is equal to await get table data. And last but not least, let me not forget to call the actual function here in the onReady, which is something that I usually forget to do. So we're going to have here setup table repeater. And I think that that should do the trick for an initial test. So let me go ahead and publish this and head over to the live site to do some testing together with you. Okay, so here I am on the live site, and there's some good news and there's some bad news. So obviously the data is being passed into the repeater because there are 5 lines here to the repeater, which corresponds to the 5 items that we have in our collection. If I go here into the console logs, we can see that we are getting the array with all the cars. So our query of the car data was successful, but there's something going on with the rather complex kind of connector code that I wrote. And for some reason, the values are not being populated here. So let's go ahead and try and debug and see why that might be. So let me take a look over here. So let's take a look first here at what this data is. So console.log data, and here we'll have data. And let's go over here and see as well. So here we have item column, setting value to be the item. Yeah, so that should be fine. Let's do over here. After that, we'll do console.log, and we'll essentially log the value of the item. So if any of them are being set, then that should be setting there. That should be showing the value over there. Why isn't it letting me click inside the console log? I don't know. There we go. Okay, so let me go ahead and publish this. Okay, here I am back on the live site, and I can see now why we might have been having issues. So if we go over here, here we can see essentially the data that we've gotten from the collection. And one potential issue is that, well, there's a few things. One is that we have these two IDs over here. I guess that's for the owner and the member ID of the create. No, that's the owner. The item ID and the owner. And we wouldn't want those to be included. We also have an issue of having the created date and the updated date, and we don't want that. And we also have this issue, which this is a number, which might also create some problems for us. So we're going to have to find a way to filter away all that data and see why it's not, and see if that helps us at all. But I still have one little issue, and that is, so here, we see here that 0 is a regular string, which is an item that should work. But all of these are not working. So I would expect that, let's say, these first 3 would work, and then maybe, for example, would break over here when we get to the date. But that's not the case. That's not what's happening. So there must be some other issue here as well with setting of the values. We have column, index plus 1. And this is column 1. So this is interesting that this is happening. But let's do first things first. Let's work on the filter here for the data. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll set up a filter over here. So we'll have the keys here as an array. And essentially what I'll want to do is I'll set up a filter. So dot filter. And we'll say that the key, so what I'll do is I'm going to create an array up here. Okay, I'm going to create an array up here of the values that we don't want the key to be. So const, let's call it system fields. Those are the ones essentially that we don't want to include. And they're going to be ID, and they're going to be created date, and it's going to be updated date. I'm pretending I know these by heart, and I know this is gonna hurt me later on. And it's going to be owner. Okay, and we're gonna say here that the system fields dot includes key, and we're going to add a not before that. So essentially, we're filtering down our keys to only those keys which are not included inside of the system field keys. Okay, another thing we said we wanted to do is to make sure that all of our keys are strings. So then what I'll do over here is that when we map all of our keys and turn them into the actual values, I'll just add in here a toString. So dot toString, and that will ensure that everything is essentially a string. So I'm going to go ahead now and publish this, and we'll head back and do some more testing. Hopefully this helped. If not, we'll find the rest of the bugs. Okay, so here I am on the live site, and now we can see here that inside of our data arrays, we have only the 5 snippets of data that we want. We have only those 5 values and not all of the system fields and not whatnot. But our table is still not populated, which means that our problem must lie somewhere here within the for each, because until this point we're good. And if I take a look here, so I noticed that I have a typo, which is very common when writing code, and I forgot to add in the pound. And this is, I'll highlight this because this especially happens in scenarios where you're using a template literal. Because generally when you're using, like you're populating an element with some value in code, then it has like IntelliSense, and it kind of knows that that element exists and it shows you the name and whatnot. But here, when you're doing it with a template literal, it doesn't detect it um, because of the template literal. So that's why these kinds of typos happen in these situations a lot more often. And I think that that was really the final thing. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to get rid of our logs actually, because we don't need them anymore. And I'm going to go ahead and publish this, head to the site, hopefully for the last time, at least for this part of the tutorial, and then we can move forward. Okay, so here I am on the live site, and as you can see, our data is populated. And it's all inputs, and we can make changes and whatnot. So the kind of last thing we need to do, but probably not last thing, is that we need to essentially save changes that we make to this table to our CMS collection. In order to do that, there's 2 approaches that we can take. We can either add in some kind of button, which will save all of the changes after we've made a change, or we can set up a way to make a change as soon as the person types the change. I'm going to go with the button method, because generally I think that's a slightly better approach in terms of not like making 1,000, update calls in terms of Wix data as the person types. But yeah, you should just know that there are those 2 approaches, and we're going to do the save button approach. And before we do that, we're also going to need to make a few adjustments to our collection permissions. So let's head back to the editor and set that up. So first of all, our adjustments to the collection permissions. So I'm going to go over here to the CMS, your collections, and I'm going to go and open up the permissions and privacy here for the collection. And at the moment, it's only on show content, which means people can see, but they can't make any changes. So I'm going to head over here to custom, and I'm going to change the view to be everyone, and I'm going to also set the update to be everyone. And add is something that we can talk about later in terms of how to let people add more things in if we have time, which I don't think we will. So for now, I'm just going to set up view and update. And this should allow anybody on the site to view everything from the collection and make changes to the collection. It's highly likely that when you're doing this, you're going to want something more conservative. So for example, item creator, or even setting up some kind of backend API to deal with all the updates. But for now, I'm making it super exposed just to make it easier for us to develop. So I'm going to head over here and do save. And now what we need to do is add in a button we said we're going to use for saving. So let's go ahead and add in a button. And I'm going to change this to say save. And we'll go here back into our IDE. I'll change the name of our button to be save button so we can access that PR code and know what it actually is. And now what we're going to do is we're going to set up a function that will actually do the saving functionality. So let me go over here to the bottom, and I'm going to add in a new function. So this is going to be an async function. And this is going to be our save table function. Let's just call it save table. And what we're going to want to do here now is we're going to run a bulk update. And we're going to want to update all of the items inside of the table, which means we might need to do some re-engineering here, because essentially what we did is we stripped down the data. So now we only have the field values inside of the table. Okay, we don't have their actual keys, and we don't have the association with which item they're associated, etc. So we're going to need to figure out a way that when we make changes or when we collect all the data back from the table, we associate it correctly with the original data, and especially with the system fields as well. So the way we're going to approach this is by using the repeater as our source of truth for the data. And what we're going to do is inside of the setup table repeater function, in addition to setting the value of each input, we're also going to set up event listeners for the inputs. So I'm just going to grab each one of these inputs like that, and I'm going to set up an onChange event listener. And essentially what we're going to do when there is a change to one of the inputs, we are going to change the item data of that item in the repeater, okay? And we're going to, in order to do that, we're going to need to know which field has been changed. Because remember, again, we converted everything to an array, so we're working with columns from 1 to 5. But we need to kind of reverse convert back into a key value pair. Okay, we need to know which field value has been changed. So in order to do that, I'm just going to separate out some of the code that we wrote earlier. So here I'm going to say const keys, and that's going to be equal to this. So const keys, those are just our keys, and then we're going to filter down the keys. But what we have here is something very valuable, which is an array of all the fields and their association with their placement in the array, which we set up the columns based on. Okay? I hope it's not getting too complicated. So essentially all we need to do now is that whenever there is a change to one of our inputs, we can say that the item data that matches the keys at the value of index should be equal to essentially the changed value, which will be, we could just go over here and say event. So event.target.value. Okay. I will go over this again at the end when we do like a code review, assuming that it works. I don't want to explain it in depth now, and then it won't work, and then that'll be embarrassing. So this is what we're going to attempt here. And once we have this set up, it actually makes our save table function really simple, because all we need to do is say const updated data equals to, and then just get the data from the repeater. So repeater table repeater dot data, and this should have the updated data because we were updating the repeater data as we made changes. And then we can run a Wix data update. So we'll say const data, or let's change the naming here a little bit. So let's call this data to update. And then this will be our updated data. And that will be equal to await Wix data dot bulk update. And here we pass in the collection ID, which is cars, and we pass in all of the items, which is going to be our data to update. Okay, and then we can add here at the end a console.log updated data and updated data, just that we know that it worked and we can kind of look at it in the console logs. Last but not least, we need to set up the event listener for the button. So I'm going to head back over here into our onReady function, and I'm going to select our save button. And .onClick, we're going to save table. Awesome. I think we're ready to do some testing. So I'm going to go ahead and publish the site and meet you on the live site. So here we are on the live site, and let's go ahead and make some changes. So I'm going to, let's say, let's make changes here just to the Civic, the Honda Civic. So we'll change it to, let's say, 2019, and I'll change it to be black. Okay. And I'm going to go over here and click Save. Let's inspect and check out our console log. So here we have the updated data, and we have an error. No, we don't have an error. We have updated. Oh, updated item IDs. Sorry, I haven't done a bulk update in a while, so I wasn't actually sure what to, interesting. So for some reason, there's only 4 IDs here, which is curious. Let me go ahead and see the actual collection and see if we have anything that looks good. So let's go over here and I'll open up our cars collection. And no, there's been no change here. So silver Honda Civic, I don't see any change. So back here on the live site, I've been kind of playing around. And I tried to change another object, another value here and run the update. And I noticed that for some reason it's skipping specifically the lines that we update. Okay, so for some reason, it's only running the update on the ones that we actually didn't want the update for. And I tried to take a peek at the documentation to understand what the skipped means. And it doesn't really explain why an item might be skipped, at least not in what I read. I did kind of skim it. So we're going to need to add in a few more console logs and try and figure out what's going on. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, let's see what the console.log data to update looks like. Maybe there's something wrong with that data. Maybe it got corrupted somehow. And let's take a look over here and add in a log as well. So I'll add in here console.log, and I'll add in the item data keys index. So let's try, let's do keys index. And let's log also the event.target.value. So this should be essentially the key value pair of what we're trying to update. So let me go ahead and I'll publish that and we'll head back to the live site for some more testing. Okay, so here we are back on the live site, and let's go ahead and try and make a change here. So let's change this one, let's say from 2000 to 2021, and there we go. Okay, so I'm already seeing what the issue is here. And that is that it's changing the ID to 2021 and not the actual key that we wanted to change. And the reason for that is that essentially we ran the filter after we ran the object.keys. So here, this is all the keys. So our matching between kind of the indexing and stuff is not all lining up. So let's see what we can do about that. If there's a way that we can somehow run the filter. So I don't think that we can filter before we run the object.keys. Interesting. So what are we going to do here? Let me think about this for a moment and I'll hop right back in. Okay, I'm back and quite quickly because this is actually not as complicated as I thought. Because we can just apply the filter and that should do the trick. So essentially, I'll add here another, let's add in another variable. I'll say const filtered keys, and that will be equal to this. Grab this and put this right over here. And then here we'll have filtered keys dot map. And then all we need to do is here, instead of getting the indexes from keys, we'll get it from filtered keys. So we'll have here filtered keys, and here as well we'll have filtered keys. And I think that should do the trick. I'm going to publish, head to the live site, hopefully for the last time, and we'll do some testing. Okay, here we are back on the live site. Let's try and make a change. So I'm going to change this to 2021. And now you can see here that it's matching up year 2021 and not ID 2021. So let's make all the changes. No, so I don't want to change that. Let's change some stuff up here. So I'm going to change Sarah here to, let's say, 2017. And this will be a purple car. And let's make some more changes over here. So instead of Emily, this will be Bemily. I'm trying to think of stuff to change. And this will be David will be Dad. Okay, so we made a few changes to all of our data. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And good, so I'm seeing here skipped 0, which is good. And these are all the updated IDs, which is all of our IDs. So we're on the right track. Let's head over to our site. And let's check out our actual data collection. And okay, so we definitely ran an update. Let's see. So we see here Dad and Bemily are there. The only thing that's whoops, I see that my my lovely green screen is falling out here. Broke the magic. Okay, but we see here that there's that the values are not matching up because the input values are strings versus this, which is a number field. But that's not such a big issue. That's something that we could probably write a few lines of code to fix or write some kind of data hook or something along those lines. But yeah, but this is fundamentally working. Okay. And I hope you're as excited as I am. And I think we're going to wrap up here because I've literally been filming this thing for hours because my computer keeps on overheating. But I think that this should give you the tools that you need in order to create a, a editable table of your own. So just to do a brief code recap, what we did is, first of all, we set up this get table data function, which, as in its name, gets the data of the table from our collection using a query. Next, we have the setup table repeater function. This is really the heart of the whole operation. First, we get the keys of our item data, and then we filter those down to have only the specific fields that we actually want to display in the collection. And finally, what we do is we use those keys in order to get the actual values from the item data. So essentially what we have at the end of this is an array with all of the values that we want for each item inside of our table. Then we essentially run a for each loop, and for each item in that array, we assign it to one of the inputs for one of the columns by using the naming that we set up for the columns as well as the indexes of the array. We also set up an onChange event so that whenever we change one of the values inside of the input, it will change the actual data of the item data of the repeater. And last but not least, we assigned the data from get table data to the repeater. So that's what displays essentially everything inside of our table. And finally, we have the save table function, which is essentially the handler for our save button. And what it does is it gets the data that we want to update, so the data from the repeater, and then it uses a bulk update in order to update the collection data. And that's it. That's pretty much it. There's definitely more to explore here in terms of, different ways to handle the data updates, how to allow users to add an additional line, let's say, how to restrict this to only specific members, letting members only see their own data and stuff like that. But I am going to leave that to comments and forum discussions, and also just inferring from some of the other tutorials that we have. And that's going to be all here for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Even if you didn't enjoy it so much and you want to give some encouragement and support, still give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more tutorials like this about Velo, about Wix, please do consider subscribing to the channel, and I will see you next time.